What happens when one man's prized vintage Jeep becomes the target of an HOA president's petty crusade, a battle for freedom that takes the entire neighborhood by storm? Watch how stubbornness, a little horsepower, and a lot of heart turn the tables in this unforgettable story. Let's begin the story. The shriek of tires and the sharp crack of a woman's voice shattered the early peace of Misty Pines, a sleepy lakeside town where nothing usually stirred before 8 a.m. except maybe the gulls. I stumbled onto the porch of my weathered cabin, blinking against the harsh morning light, wearing nothing but pajama pants and an old fishing t-shirt. What I saw below was so absurd it took a moment for my coffee-deprived brain to process. HOA President Karen, veins popping. Her frizzed halo of rage was barking frantic orders into a bright pink walkie-talkie, while two thick-set men struggled with what could only be described as a suicide mission. They were trying and spectacularly failing to tow away my beloved 1952 Willys Jeep, a relic of my late grandfather and the crown jewel of my little lakeside plot. The flatbed truck they'd brought looked like it had escaped from a junkyard demolition derby. Its engine wheezed, the tow straps strained, and within seconds, with a whip-like snap, one of them recoiled and sent the nearest goon flying backward into the prized rose bushes. Karen had once fined me $500 for trimming it safely. I leaned casually against the porch railing, mug in hand, a grin curling at the corner of my mouth. It was like watching the world's saddest circus, performed by clowns who didn't even know they were funny. In that moment, as Karen shrieked into her walkie like a deranged parrot, and the second tow guy dangled helplessly from a frayed strap, something clicked inside me. If they thought they could mess with my Jeep, they had no idea what kind of storm they were about to unleash. My name is Luke Hammond, ex-Army engineer, lifelong outdoorsman, stubborn as hell, and for 5 years, I'd lived peacefully just outside the official borders of this HOA kingdom. My property, bought before the HOA even existed, was my personal slice of heaven, a 2-acre plot tucked between towering pines and the glittering lake, with a dock, a smokehouse, and my Jeep, polished to a gleam, parked proudly under the old oak. I had no interest in their silly lawn regulations, nailbox color standards, or approved window treatments, but Karen, self-crowned queen of Misty Pines HOA, saw my independence as a personal affront to her paper-thin authority. And now, watching her futile attempts to yank away a piece of my history, I realized this wasn't just about an old Jeep anymore. This was about control. About standing up to the petty tyrants who thought they could dictate every blade of grass and every ounce of freedom. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows over the chaos below. I took a long, slow sip of coffee, savoring the moment, and smiled. If Karen wanted a war, she'd just started one, and I had a feeling she had no clue the kind of battle-hardened opponent she had just picked a fight with. The days after the first towing fiasco unfolded like a badly written soap opera. Karen, humiliated but clearly not defeated, pivoted to subtler, more insidious tactics. It started with bright yellow courtesy notices slapped onto my front door like ugly stickers, each one more passive-aggressive than the last. Non-conforming vehicle storage, one shrieked in bold, underlined letters. Another accused me of creating visual disharmony, whatever that meant. At first, I laughed. I framed the first few notices and hung them proudly above the Jeep's dashboard, a badge of honor for surviving the HOA's pettiest attacks. But Karen didn't find it funny. Every time one of her notices failed to spark a reaction, she doubled down like a gambler chasing a losing hand. Fines started arriving, next absurd amounts for community violations I wasn't even legally bound by. The best part, my land, my title, my freedom had all been legally secured long before the Misty Pines HOA ever slithered into existence. Legally, they couldn't touch me. But Karen lived in a world where feelings trumped facts, and her feelings were that I didn't belong. Neighbors whispered. Some shook their heads sympathetically as they walked their designer poodles by my fence. Others crossed the street to avoid being seen talking to me, afraid of landing on Karen's invisible blacklist. It wasn't just about the Jeep anymore. It was about principle. About the battle between living free and living terrified of the next compliance check. Late one evening, as the mist rolled off the lake in soft, ghostly tendrils, I spotted Karen standing at the edge of my property line. She wasn't alone. Two clipboard-wielding HOA board members flanked her like stormtroopers, their faces tight and joyless. I watched from my porch, arms crossed, daring them to step 1 inch onto my gravel drive. They didn't, not yet, but their stares said everything. We will find a way. I realized then that Karen wasn't fighting me because she hated the Jeep. She was fighting me because she needed to prove to herself and the hollow little empire she'd built that no one could exist outside her control. My refusal to bend made me a threat, and threats had to be crushed. But I wasn't going anywhere. Neither was the Jeep. And if Karen thought paperwork and dirty glances were enough to scare me off, she was about to find out how deeply stubborn one man could be when he was pushed too far. The wind picked up, rustling the pines. The Jeep's chrome trim caught the last light of the sunset and gleamed like a blade. I leaned against the porch post, a slow grin spreading across my face. Let them come. It was a week later, just after dawn, when Karen made her first truly brazen move. I had just finished my morning run along the lakeside, breathing in the clean, pine-sweetened air when I spotted something wrong. Deep, fresh tire tracks gouged through my gravel driveway, leading straight to the place where my Jeep usually rested like a proud sentinel. At first, my heart hammered against my ribs. I sprinted the last few yards, visions of a stripped chassis or a burnt-out husk flashing through my mind. But the Jeep was still there untouched, at least at first glance. Only as I got closer did I notice the scratches gouged into the polished steel of the front bumper, deep and deliberate, like someone had tried and failed to chain it up and drag it off like a trophy. It didn't take a detective to figure out who was behind it. Karen might have traded her bright pink walkie-talkie for silence, but her fingerprints were all over this disaster. She had escalated. Quiet letters and fines weren't enough anymore. Now she was trying brute force. I crouched by the bumper, tracing one long, ugly scratch with my fingertip. My blood boiled. Anger, sharp and bitter, flared in my chest, not just at the damage to the Jeep, but at the goal of it. This was my home, my land, my life, and she thought she could just take it. No, not today, not ever. I stood up slowly, feeling the old instincts from my army days roar back to life. My cabin wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. And now it was time to treat it like one. I spent the rest of that morning turning my 2-acre slice of paradise into something Karen's army of clipboard warriors would regret ever setting foot near. I installed motion sensors, hidden cameras, and floodlights so bright they could fry a mosquito midair. Most importantly, I outfitted the Jeep with some old tricks. A GPS tracker concealed deep inside the engine bay, reinforced steel wheel clamps of my own design, and a custom security system wired to an alarm that would make a siren sound like a lullaby. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was preparation. That evening, as the sun bled across the lake in vivid reds and golds, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching the property with sharp eyes. The Jeep gleamed under the security lights like a warhorse armored for battle. I knew Karen wasn't done. She had tasted escalation and liked it. But if she thought she could rattle me, if she thought she could quietly steal a piece of my soul, she was about to learn something the hard way. You don't push a man like me into a corner unless you're ready to deal with what comes roaring out. The wind carried the faint echo of laughter from the neighboring houses, brittle, forced. The neighborhood was holding its breath. They knew the storm was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be me scrambling for footing. It would be Karen. It happened in the deepest part of the night hour when even the crickets grew quiet and the mist swallowed the edges of the world. I had just drifted into a light, restless sleep when the shriek of my motion alarm split the darkness like a gunshot. Instinct kicked in before thought. I was up, boots pulled on, and grabbing the flashlight stashed by the door in seconds. Out on the porch, the scene was almost too surreal to believe. Karen, still wearing her ridiculous HOA badge clipped to her cardigan like it was a police shield, had returned. But this time, she hadn't come alone. 3 men in dark clothing were clustered around my Jeep, one of them frantically trying to saw through the wheel clamps while another struggled to hook a heavy chain to the undercarriage. The third man was setting up what looked like a hydraulic jack, probably thinking they could lift the Jeep onto another flatbed without even driving it. Karen stood a few paces away, arms crossed, watching with cold satisfaction, like a general surveying a battlefield she believed was already won. She didn't see me slip around the side of the house, moving fast and silent. She didn't notice when I pulled out my phone and started recording everything. Trespassing, attempted grand theft, malicious property damage. It was all right there, crystal clear. I stepped out of the shadows, flashlight beams slicing across the men's faces. Evening, folks, I said, my voice low and dangerous. The three intruders froze mid-action, looking like a trio of overgrown raccoons caught raiding the wrong trash can. Karen spun toward me, her face a twisted mask of fury and panic. "You have no right to interfere," she shrieked, voice breaking. I took a slow step closer. "Ron, you have no right to be here. I warned you once. You didn't listen. Now you're going to learn." The sound of sirens growing louder in the distance made Karen's eyes widen. She wasn't stupid, just arrogant. She realized, too late, that her night raid had backfired spectacularly. The men bolted like scared deer, abandoning their equipment and fleeing into the trees. Karen hesitated, torn between chasing after them or standing her ground like the defiant queen she believed herself to be. In the end, pride won out. She stayed. Big mistake. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights bathed my property. My cousin Wyatt, one of the deputies from the neighboring county, stepped out of his cruiser with a big, slow grin. "Well, Luke," he drawled, surveying the scene, "looks like you caught yourself a real fine mess tonight." Karen tried to launch into one of her speeches about community standards and emergency powers, but Wyatt cut her off with a wave of his hand. He wasn't here for HOA politics. He was here for the law. He read Karen her rights on my front lawn, in front of half the neighborhood who had woken up and come out to watch. I stood by the Jeep, arms crossed, the faintest smile playing on my lips. As they put her in the back of the cruiser, Karen turned her face away from the cameras and phones recording her every humiliation. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just sat there, seething, knowing she had lost this round. But deep down, I knew it too. She wasn't beaten yet. This was just her first defeat, and a wounded queen was always the most dangerous. After Karen's late-night fiasco, Misty Pines buzzed with gossip like a kicked hornet's nest. But for 3 days afterward, there was an eerie calm. To calm, I knew better than to trust it. Karen was licking her wounds, scheming, and when she came back, it wouldn't be subtle. I decided to make my own first move. At dawn on the 4th day, I rolled my Jeep down the gravel path that bordered my property and parked it square across the private road leading into the HOA's precious gated community. Not the public road, mind you, but the HOA's manicured, overpriced driveway. The Jeep sat like an iron sentinel, stubborn and immovable, its vintage body gleaming defiantly under the morning sun. I stepped back, arms crossed, and waited. It didn't take long. The first confused residents arrived, bumping up against the blockade like ants hitting a wall, honking, yelling, demanding explanations. But I didn't move. I leaned casually against the Jeep, sipping my coffee with all the calm satisfaction of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. The residents began to gather, some furious, some curious, some quietly smirking. It was then, right on cue, that Karen stormed onto the scene like an avenging angel in kitten heels, her face already red with rage. "You can't do this," she screamed, jabbing a finger at me so hard it looked like she might sprain it. "You're blocking emergency access." I tilted my head lazily. "Actually, Karen," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm parked entirely on my property line. Your private road just happens to dead end here. Maybe you should have thought about that before trying to steal my Jeep." She sputtered, furious but momentarily lost for words. Around us, the crowd swelled, neighbors filming, whispering, exchanging glances. Karen's iron grip on Misty Pines was slipping, and everyone could see it. She tried to rally. She called in her so-called HOA emergency response team, 3 guys in matching polo shirts and clip-on badges who looked like they were more suited to guarding mall food courts. They marched up to me, one holding a clipboard like it was a shield against common sense. "Sir, you are in violation of HOA emergency protocols," the bravest one said, puffing out his chest. I barely contained my laugh. "There's no emergency. You want to call the sheriff? Go ahead. My cousin's on duty today." The poor man's face fell, his bravado leaking away. Karen looked around, desperate for support, but she found none. The residents were siding with me, and the momentum was shifting fast. In a final act of petulance, Karen tried to order a private tow service again. But when they arrived, the operator refused to touch my Jeep without a court order, citing potential liability. Watching her stomp and shriek in defeat was better than any fireworks show. The best part, someone, bless their mischievous soul, dragged out a grill, set up a few lawn chairs, and turned the whole blockade into an impromptu block party. Music blared. Kids played tag around the Jeep. Neighbors handed me cold drinks like I was the town hero. Karen stood in the middle of it all, trembling with rage, utterly powerless. It wasn't just my Jeep they couldn't move. It was the whole spirit of Misty Pines, stubborn, laughing, alive again. And Karen. She was watching her empire collapse one tailgate party at a time. 3 days after the Great Blockade, the situation had morphed from whole drama to full-blown neighborhood folklore. News crews started showing up, drawn by whispers of the man who fought the hole with a Jeep. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing the Jeep gleaming defiantly across the entrance, while children posed beside it for selfies like it was a national monument. Karen had become a ghoster on Misty Pines, a furious, plotting ghost. But early on a cloudless Thursday morning, she returned. And this time, she didn't come with letters, fines, or clipboard squads. She came with war machines. The rumble of diesel engines shattered the morning stillness. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, and my jaw dropped. A full professional towing company had arrived, not some fly-by-night operation, but a big city crew armed with an industrial-grade crane truck, support vehicles, and a team in matching uniforms. They rolled up like a military convoy ready to seize enemy ground. Karen strutted at the head of the pack, her face twisted into a triumphant smirk that made my blood run cold. Behind her, a professional cameraman with a giant rig started filming, no doubt ready to broadcast her victory live to anyone who would watch. It was almost beautiful in its stupidity. I made my way down the driveway, slow and steady, like a gunslinger walking into a duel. The lead crane operator, a grizzled guy in oil-stained jeans and a safety vest, walked up to me, clipboard in hand. "Sir," he said, surprisingly polite, "we've been contracted to move this vehicle. You gonna cooperate?" I smiled, slow and wide. "Well, that depends," I said. "Did the person who hired you show you a court order?" The man frowned. "She said she had one." I chuckled darkly. "She doesn't. And if you so much as lift a tire off this gravel, you'll be committing grand theft. The sheriff's office is about 5 minutes away. Your call." The crane operator turned, scanning the growing crowd of amused neighbors and the glowering figure of Karen tapping her foot like an over-caffeinated woodpecker. After a moment of internal war, he muttered a curse, threw up his hands, and barked at his team to pack it up. Karen's face, oh, Lord, her face turned a shade of purple so violent it could have been outlawed by the Geneva Conventions. She stormed over, screeching about lawsuits and community safety, but the tow team ignored her, climbing back into their trucks. The convoy peeled away one by one, leaving Karen standing there, alone, vibrating with pure, impotent rage. But she wasn't done humiliating herself yet. In a final act of madness, she ordered her whole security guards to physically seize the Jeep. I swear, it was like watching a bad sitcom, 3 overweight men in ill-fitting polos trying to figure out how to confiscate a 2-ton war machine. One of them, bless his ambitious soul, managed to scramble onto the hood. He barely had time to touch the steering wheel before the Jeep's hidden security system kicked in, an ear-splitting alarm blared from hidden speakers, sending the poor guy flailing off the vehicle and landing hard on the gravel, scattering a chorus of gasps and laughter through the crowd. Right on cue, my cousin Wyatt, sheriff's badge gleaming in the sun, rolled up sipping an energy drink and surveying the chaos like a man walking into his favorite bar fight. He whistled low. "Well, looks like the circus came early this year." I just grinned and said, "Don't worry, the clowns brought their own tent." As Karen screamed herself hoarse at Wyatt about emergency powers and citizens' arrests, he calmly cited her for attempted theft, trespassing, and disturbing the peace again. Karen had turned Misty Pines into a 3-ring spectacle, and everyone from the laughing kids to the amused retirees on their porches knew exactly who the real clown was. It started with one video, a shaky cell phone clip posted by Mrs. Dupree, the sweet octogenarian who lived 3 houses down. She'd captured it all: the industrial crane truck retreating in shame, the security guard flailing off my Jeep like a shotgun cartoon character, and Karen standing there shrieking incoherently about bylaws and emergency codes as if anyone still cared. Within hours, the video exploded across social media. First, it spread through Misty Pines like wildfire. Then the neighboring towns picked it up. By that evening, news vans were setting up along the lakefront like vultures drawn to a particularly juicy carcass. The headlines practically wrote themselves. "Local hero outsmarts HOA tyrant. Jeep versus HOA. Guess who won?" Freedom fighter blocks HOA power trip with a vintage Jeep. The best part, memes. Oh, the memes were glorious. Pictures of my old Willie's Jeep photoshopped onto famous battlefields, facing down tanks. Karen's furious face pasted onto cartoon villains with captions like, "When your HOA president thinks she's a Marvel supervillain but can't beat a parking brake." Someone even started selling t-shirts with a picture of the Jeep and the words, "Freedom through horsepower." By the end of the next day, the hashtag Jeep Justice was trending nationally. Meanwhile, Karen's life and her precious HOA presidency was disintegrating in real time. Her every outburst, every failed scheme, every tantrum was now immortalized in living, laughing color across the internet. News anchors chuckled through segments about one woman's war on freedom. Local talk shows replayed clips of her screaming about community standards while children roasted marshmallows at the blockade party. Inside Misty Pines, the shift was seismic. Neighbors who once cowered under Karen's clipboard tyranny now openly mocked her. Families who'd once silently suffered through HOA nonsense brought lawn chairs and popcorn to the Jeep blockade, turning it into a full-blown street fair every afternoon. Someone even set up a lemonade stand with a sign that read, "Proceeds go to Jeep maintenance and freedom funds." Karen tried, Lord, did she try to spin it. She called emergency HOA meetings, issued desperate emails blaming external agitators for the chaos, even threatened lawsuits against the homeowners who violated decorum by attending the impromptu parties. But it was too late. The court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict, and it was savage. Petitions to recall the entire HOA board circulated at lightning speed. Sponsors pulled out of the annual HOA gala. Homeowners demanded audits. Lawyers whispered about class action lawsuits for harassment and misuse of HOA funds. Even some of Karen's most loyal foot soldiers began quietly backing away, sensing the ship sinking fast. At night, I sat on my porch with my feet propped on the railing, watching the floodlights bounce off the Jeep's polished surface. I'd lift a glass of sweet tea to the stars, smiling to myself as the soft murmur of laughter and celebration echoed across Misty Pines. Karen had waged a war she could never win. And the best part, she had handed me the victory on a silver platter wrapped in internet fame and carried by a tidal wave of community outrage. But deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't quite over yet. Karen wasn't the type to slink away quietly. No, her next move would be reckless, desperate, and destined for disaster. And I would be ready. By the fourth morning after the Jeep Justice explosion, an eerie stillness settled over Misty Pines. No screaming, no clipboard patrols, no passive-aggressive flyers jammed into mailboxes. Just the breeze whispering through the pines and the lazy lap of lake water against the docks. It was the calm before the storm. I was sanding a piece of driftwood on my porch, trying to enjoy the rare peace, when a silver luxury SUV crept down the private road, parking just far enough away to raise alarms in my gut. I leaned against the railing, watching. After a few minutes, Karen emerged from the driver's side, flanked by two newcomers, one carrying a thick leather briefcase, the other dragging a full media camera setup. I narrowed my eyes. She brought back up. The cameraman set up swiftly, completely ignoring the growing number of neighbors peeking from windows, clutching coffee cups and cell phones ready to record at the first hint of fresh disaster. The briefcase man handed Karen a stack of papers, and with the stiff, manic energy of a losing gambler betting the house, she stormed across the field toward the blockade where my Jeep still stood, stubborn and unmoved. I wandered down casually to meet her, hands tucked in my pockets. The cameraman's red light blinked on. This wasn't an ambush. This was a performance. Karen spun dramatically toward the camera, fixing a wide, pained smile onto her face like a politician caught in scandal. She launched into the most deranged speech I had ever heard, her voice syrupy with fake concern. Due to ongoing safety hazards created by unauthorized vehicle obstruction, the Misty Pines Homeowners Association has been forced to act to preserve the safety, harmony, and community spirit of our beloved neighborhood. Neighbors snorted audibly. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Karen, undeterred, held up the papers like Moses revealing the commandments. This emergency injunction grants me the authority to remove this dangerous obstruction immediately, she crowed. I squinted at the document from where I stood. No official seals, no judge's signature, just a mass of legal-sounding gibberish printed from her home office. The crowd was starting to gather now, more people trickling down the lane, many carrying lawn chairs and coolers. Some were already shaking their heads, knowing exactly what was about to happen. With a triumphant flourish, Karen pulled a cheap bolt cutter from her designer handbag and stalked toward the Jeep's steel wheel locks. She knelt dramatically and snipped. The bolt cutter snapped not the lock. The tool broke clean in half, the clanging pieces flying to the ground at her feet. For a moment, time froze. Then the laughter erupted, long, loud, and merciless. A neighbor 2 doors down dropped their coffee cup, howling. Someone else started slow clapping. Even the cameraman's shoulders shook. Karen flushed crimson, her hands balling into fists. Not to be defeated, she dropped the broken tool, grabbed the wheel lock with both hands, and began yanking furiously, grunting like a rabid badger. That was when the familiar whine of a sheriff's cruiser cut through the chaos. Deputy Wyatt stepped out, sunglasses glinting, sipping from his ever-present energy drink. He strolled casually over, nodding to the crowd, and addressed Karen without even raising his voice. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from private property." Karen spun, thrusting the bogus injunction into his chest like a sword. Wyatt took it, glanced at it, and without a word ripped it cleanly in half. "You just added attempted fraud to your list of problems," he said calmly. Karen gaped like a fish on dry land. The crowd began chanting, half jokingly, half pleadingly, "Arrest her! Arrest her!" Wyatt sighed theatrically, then reached for his cuffs. Karen screeched incoherently about rights and conspiracies as he gently turned her on and clicked the cuffs into place. The cameraman zoomed in gleefully, capturing every second of Karen's walk of shame to the back seat of the cruiser. The crowd cheered louder than ever before, neighbors hugging, high-fiving, some even lifting their kids onto their shoulders like it was a parade. As Wyatt drove her away, Karen's face pressed miserably against the window. I leaned back against the Jeep and tipped my imaginary hat. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a historic collapse. And Misty Pines would never be the same again. Karen's arrest wasn't just a humiliation, it was the death knell of her reign over Misty Pines. By the time the sun dipped below the treetops that evening, news of her downfall had already raced ahead of her. Videos of her tantrum, the broken bolt cutter, and the slow-motion footage of her being handcuffed by Deputy Wyatt exploded across the internet. Jeep Justice hit national trending. Memes flooded every corner of social media. Karen's furious face superimposed over medieval paintings titled "The Fall of Tyranny." Even late-night TV hosts couldn't resist roasting her. But it wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a movement. By early evening, an emergency hall meeting was called. It wasn't held in the cozy community center Karen once ruled like a throne room. No, it was outdoors, on the grassy common field, because so many homeowners showed up that there was no building big enough to contain their outrage. I didn't bother going. I stayed on my porch with my Jeep, the new symbol of Misty Pines, sipping a cold beer and listening to the furious uproar carry through the night air. The residents spoke, and they spoke loud. One by one, voices rose in angry testimony. Stories of harassment, tales of ridiculous fines for minor infractions, accounts of intimidation, bullying, even threatened foreclosures over trivial violations. They weren't afraid anymore. Karen had ruled through fear, but fear had fled alongside her SUV as Wyatt drove her away in handcuffs. By midnight, the decision was unanimous. Karen was officially stripped of her title as HOA President, effective immediately. But it didn't stop there. A petition to recall the entire HOA board who had backed her reign of terror was circulated and signed by nearly every resident present. The demands were clear. Immediate audit of HOA funds. New elections for every board position. Full review of the whole charter, with special emphasis on preventing abuses of power. Karen's allies, those few who hadn't already jumped ship, tried to protest, but their words were drowned under a tidal wave of cheers and applause. Misty Pines wasn't just toppling a tyrant, it was rebuilding itself from the ashes. Neighbors who had barely nodded at each other in passing were now clapping each other on the back, laughing, exchanging phone numbers. Friendships sparked, grievances aired, and forgiven. Walls that Karen had built with fear were crumbling, replaced by something real: community. And at the center of it all, without even needing to say a word, stood my Jeep. Still stubborn, still gleaming, still undefeated. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face as I listened to the bonfire crackle from the emergency meeting's spontaneous after-party. Karen was gone. Her fake authority, gone. Her petty kingdom, shattered. But most importantly, Misty Pines had remembered something it had forgotten under her rule. It belonged to the people, not the paperwork. The morning after Karen's final defeat felt like the first true breath of spring after a long, frozen winter. Misty Pines had changed overnight. The heaviness, the suspicion, the neighborly fear, all of it had evaporated like morning mist off the lake. But I wasn't about to let this moment pass quietly. Victory this sweet deserved to be celebrated properly. Within hours of Karen's ousting, plans for a freedom festival bloomed across the neighborhood faster than wildflowers. Word spread like wildfire: food trucks, a live band, lawn games, fireworks. No HOA approvals needed, no permits, just pure, joyful, and filtered rebellion against the years of tyranny they had endured. The heart of the festival would be right where the battle had been fought, at the entrance road, next to the old Willie's Jeep that had become the town's unlikely hero. The preparations were frantic and beautiful. Kids painted signs with slogans like "Horsepower equals freedom," and "We stand with the Jeep." Adults brought out grills, coolers, and lawn chairs. Local businesses donated food, drinks, even a massive firework display. Someone even managed to erect a makeshift stage out of old pallets. By late afternoon, the road was packed. It wasn't just Misty Pines anymore. People from neighboring towns poured in, drawn by the viral videos, the memes, the story that had captured the country's imagination. At the center of it all stood my Jeep, gleaming under the setting sun, festooned with banners, American flags, and hand-painted signs. It had become more than a vehicle. It was a monument to stubbornness, to common sense, to the quiet defiance of ordinary people saying enough. I was ushered onto the pallet stage by a gaggle of laughing neighbors, a cold lemonade thrust into my hand. I tapped the microphone, clearing my throat over the buzz of conversation. "Folks," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat, "this ain't just about a Jeep. It never was. It's about living free. About standing up even when it's hard. Even when it's ridiculous. Especially when it's ridiculous." A wave of cheers and laughter rippled through the crowd. I raised my glass high. To neighbors who became friends, to stubbornness, to horsepower, and to never letting anyone tell you what you can and can't do on your own land. Hundreds of glasses lifted, horns honked, someone set off an early firework that whistled and popped brilliantly against the darkening sky. Then the real show began. The fireworks erupted in a dazzling storm of color and sound, bursting right above the Jeep like a personal crown. Reds, blues, golds, and at the climax, a series of bursts spelling out a single word across the sky: freedom. The cheers shook the ground. Kids danced under the falling sparks. Neighbors hugged and clapped each other on the back. Strangers became friends. Enemies became memories. And somewhere out there, probably watching through gritted teeth on a shaky livestream, Karen witnessed the final, undeniable truth. We won. As the night deepened and the embers of the bonfires glowed low, I sat quietly beside the Jeep, the battered hero of our unlikely revolution. Around me, laughter echoed into the trees. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. The stars stretched overhead, wide and endless. For the first time in a long, long time, Misty Pines was truly free. And so was I. Lesson from the story. True freedom doesn't come from fighting every battle with anger. It comes from standing your ground with courage, patience, and an unshakable belief in your rights. Luke's story shows that sometimes the most powerful form of resistance isn't aggression, but calm, stubborn defiance paired with smart preparation and a good sense of humor. In a world where petty tyrants often hide behind titles, policies, and fake authority, ordinary people can still win by staying true to themselves, knowing the law, and refusing to be bullied into silence. Community, laughter, and resilience are stronger than fear and control. And sometimes, all it takes to spark a movement is one man, one old Jeep, and an unwavering decision to say, loud and clear, "This is my home, and I'm not backing down."